Hello everyone, this is Moonshadow Mystery, and we're doing something different today. I normally don't do anything like this, but today we are making what I call Moon's Imitation Street Vendor Ramen. It is a way of improving a typical college student meal on a budget. First, of course, we start with a pot full of water. I recommend going to about 2/3 of the way full on water if you want to properly do it. In our case, we are taking a pack of ramen and putting it in whole just like this. We are setting our seasoning packet aside. And as you can see, we've got what is a can of Bristol brand Bacon Grill Luncheon Loaf. Now, the recommended serving portion on this is 2.5 servings, so what we are going to be doing is we're going to be dividing this perfectly in half. We'll be making use of half of it for this time around. And the other half, what we will be doing is we'll be taking it, replacing it back into the can, setting it aside for a different meal at a near future. Now, for those of you who've never had the experience of seeing traditional ramen be cooked, I usually set the timer to 3 minutes. I forgot to this time. Hopefully that does not negatively affect us. We'll be cutting our luncheon loaf into fairly even slices. And then we will be cutting it vertically like so, to create us some strips. Now essentially all we have left to do is wait for our ramen to finish cooking. Afterwards we will drain a significant portion of it. And while we're doing that, allow me to show what we'll be using to season. Of course, we'll be using the typical ramen flavoring packet. In this case, we're going with a chicken-flavored ramen. Ironic, because I know we were going with a luncheon loaf, which is typically a pork or beef. We will also be using some McCormick brand rubbed sage and McCormick brand celery flakes. The rest of it is typically generic off-the-shelf spice. We'll be including crushed red pepper, Spice Supreme minced onions, Great Value brand parsley, Markham brand garlic powder. I believe I got this from Save-A-Lot. Great Value, as you know, comes from Walmart. We'll also be using Great Value brand basil and Spice It brand chives, much like the crushed red pepper. Spice It brand is typically what you get in the dollar aisle at your local Piggly Wiggly supermarket. Now we are just about done with the boiling of our noodles. And I want you to see the nice rolling boil we've got going here. And look at that. That is the exact kind of consistency you want with your ramen. Timer is just about over. I'll be redirecting over here to the sink for a moment. Timer is off. Now, I like to use a strainer for this. This way, I can prevent losing ramen. We'll be holding on to a good portion of our broth, if at all possible. I like mine a little brothier than some do. Now, you may be wondering, why am I going through all this trouble? Why not put it down the sink? Well, firstly, that is because I do not have a garbage disposal. And those of you who are not aware, this kind of ramen in fact, actually has a waxy coating for preservation purposes. Take a look here. Doesn't that look nice? Now, first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our meat and dropping it right down there into the ramen, into the broth, as close as we can. The residual heat will partially cook it. This is already fully cooked, able to be eaten straight out of the can or otherwise. I like to let it get a little bit of cooking from the broth, if at all possible. Now, typically I dice. I wanted strips this time, though, to demonstrate my process a little better. Now, I don't have a set measurement I use for my ingredients. We're going to start with our celery flakes. I don't want to put an excessive amount, but I do want enough so that as it's stirred up, I'm getting the benefits from it, not to mention the flavor. And that goes for the sage. You may be wondering why sage. Sage has numerous health benefits. In the case here, because I'm using a canned Luncheon Loaf as my meat stand-in, as opposed to fresh pork or otherwise, it'll just help to cut any, that canned taste. We're going to do a little bit of a shake with our parsley. This canister does not like to come out very evenly distributed. We're going to do the same with the basil for the same reason. Now, sometimes I use paprika, which is more of a sweet pepper. But as I showed you earlier, we're using a crushed red pepper. Now, you may not be able to see exactly how much is coming out. Try not to shake too hard. In the case of these spice brand ones, the holes do not always want to be very cooperative. But I know I might be a little more vigorous with it than I should be. I do like a little bit of spice. Same with the chives here. These holes do not want to be very cooperative. I know right now it may be looking a little messy. That is quite alright. Next, we're going to go with the minced onion. It has a shaker top. I'm taking the shaker off so I can be a little more careful here. I'm basically just adding ingredients until I'm satisfied with the amount. Now, because of where my spices are located, sometimes they get a little clumpy, so you may have to use a spice grinder to... we have the unfortunate of putting it near the stove. I do like garlic pretty well. And finally, we're going to add our chicken flavor. Now, I don't like to just dump it in. I like to kind of move it around. That way it's getting an even distribution. I don't want it accumulating, clumping up too much in one spot. Alright, now that our ingredients are all added in, I'm going to move you over to the light a little better so you can get a little bit better of a view of what I'm doing here. Sorry if I knock anything over. Take a look here. Now, it doesn't look like much like this, but once you start stirring, and you want to make sure that you stir in a very deliberate fashion. You don't want to just randomly stir it. You want to kind of, almost like you're conditioning your ramen. See, you leave it like this, you leave the broth. I usually like to set aside separate, remove the ramen first, and then make the broth with all the same ingredients, and then pour it over, because that's more traditional in that regard. But it is perfectly acceptable to do it this way as well. And I know it still doesn't look like a whole awful lot. It doesn't look very impressive. Now we are going to boil our ramen. Sorry, this stand is not the greatest. Personally speaking, you can simply tip it over and dump if you prefer. I like to scoop my ramen out. That way I can kind of re-stir as I need to in order to better mix up my ingredients. And speaking of, I will be trying here to get some of my carefully ordered meat strips out of here. Some of them did break in the stirring process. That is okay. I know everyone out there has had ramen in their life and think this can't be anything special, can it? Well, you know, that is entirely dependent on whether or not, whoop, and I'm knocking stuff over again here, but entirely on whether or not you are okay with your typical just out of the packet boiled, or in some people's case microwaved ramen. Now take a good look at that. Now, it may not have the best presentation. That is partially my doing. But you cannot tell me that this does not look better by comparison than just generic ramen. You could, I'd probably call you a liar, but to each their own. And all I have to say after that is get your fork or your chopsticks. I personally prefer chopsticks in this case. Make sure you never stick them straight up and down. That is offensive in Japanese culture. And join me in saying, Itadakimasu. That has been your instructional course on Moon's Imitation Street Vendor Ramen. I wish I had had some water chestnuts or some bamboo shoots. Personally, those are particular favorites of mine to add, but I didn't. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough tutorial. This is something we've never done before. I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and a great weekend ahead, depending on when you get around to seeing today's video. And as always, my viewers, don't forget, don't go changing for anyone but yourselves. Click my name below the video description if you want to see the other content we have available on the channel here. And leave a comment. Especially if you decide to try this recipe for yourself. I hope you have a... I already said my usual thing. But I'll see you right back here. Same Moonshadow time, same mystery channel, when we get back to you with more content. Until then, everyone, bon appetit!